Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market.
Good morning. We are our podcast number 10, and welcome to the David and David on Real Estate.
Good morning, everybody.
Absolutely. It's a great morning, and let's jump right into it, David. I know you were sharing with me just before we jumped on the call about the market, and you're reading a really good article.
Yeah, just article, not relevant just to our local market, but just general across Canada. Like there's been a real cooling trend or a slowdown in the market. They're saying 80% of the markets across Canada have really cooled off in the last 2 months. So, and not to become bad markets or anything like that. Still very good markets in any year.
Right.
Still active markets, but off that peak that it was on, off that frenzy that it was on, that we've talked about in previous podcasts with the multi-offer bidding and the continued pushing up of prices. So it hasn't been felt so much on the price side yet because the prices are still high, which is a bit of a carryover because prices get pushed up from biddings, and all of a sudden everybody thinks that that's what their house is worth in the open market, which may or may not be true, but so we'll see what people get. But there's definitely been a bit of a slowdown to the market over the last 2 months.
Yeah, no, I absolutely.
You're hearing that with your agents, I'm sure, too.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it since I think the first podcast that we recorded, right? I've been saying that we're dropping off from the high, right? But it's all still very relative to what we're really comparing to. So when we're comparing to the absolute peak that we were at in the middle of March of 2021, we are coming off that peak. But if we compare to a seller's market, we're still in a very strong seller's market. When you look at the absorption rates, when you look at the list to sell ratio, the market is still very, very strong, but it is definitely coming off the high that was in the middle of March of 2021. And as you mentioned before we jumped on the call, that prices are still not really affected too much, especially when you look at the median and the average price. It's still holding very much at record high levels.
Right. And the other point that you and I already discussed before, and the article mentioned it too, is you can't look at May 2020 as a comparison to May 2021. It was an aberration right in the middle of COVID. People weren't sure, which end was up and where things were going. So anybody analyzing these things, goes back to prior years and see what trends are, because normally April, May, June, everything is ramping up. June's usually a really active month, and and generally a lot of people would take time off in the summer months, and we would see a natural cool down. This year, who knows how that's going to be? Are people, taking vacations, or people are just happy to get out of their house to go to an outdoor patio somewhere because that's a brand new thing to do this week? So are people really going to be taking holidays like they would? Are the agents taking holidays? Are people putting their house up and take holidays? I think a lot of that are sort of unknowns this year. So the market might continue to be strong through the summer.
I think the trends are definitely changing. Historically, the trend was always that we saw a big slowdown in the summertime, just people going up to the cottage, people enjoying the nice weather, people really getting outside in a big way. We tend to have a really long winter in Canada, so I think people really get weather happy, which is phenomenal. I think the trend we're going to see this year is cottage properties are going to continue going up in value. It's absolutely amazing how many customers and even business partners that I work with personally have called my office in the last few weeks, and they're really jumping on the cottage bandwagon in a huge way. And I think that trend is going to continue moving up. People have been spending a lot of time in their homes more than ever. They're not traveling, and they really want to get out there in a big way. And they love the Canadian outdoors. It's great. Like Muskoka is beautiful. The Kawartha Lakes is beautiful. Peterborough is gorgeous. There's so much to do. There's so much to see. And then you get the family bonding time, which is, really, really important as well. So I think we're going to continue to see the cottage trend really go up in a big way throughout the summer months.
Yeah, no, I agree too. Last summer was quite active with cottage properties, and it carried right through the fall and the winter. Our firm has a fairly big presence now in Muskoka. We're doing a lot of cottage properties. We've got some signage up there. We've got more coming, and I'm up there regularly, and so is my partner Jonathan. So we know the area well, and we're connected with a lot of it, and we do a lot of cottage properties, and more and more. So a lot of clients interested in it, and the prices are pretty high. It's amazing how those prices have gone over the last year because there's been such a demand for them. But I think that's going to continue. People are way more focused on lifestyle and having outdoor space. And also they've discovered, just through working remotely, that they can work remotely up at the cottage the same way they can work remotely from their homes. So it doesn't really matter where they are, they can still be functioning. So they can use those cottage properties a little more than they otherwise would. It's not strictly go up there on the weekend. You might be able to get up there for, in the middle of the week too, and work from there too. So it's a much more attractive option than it was a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. And there's certain cottage properties or neighborhoods that are less than 2 hours away from the city. There's a lot of choice and variety. Certain Kawartha lakes are a lot closer than Muskoka. So, don't think that you have to drive 5-6 hours to find the right cottage property, because if you have the right agent and the right guidance, there are cottage properties are a lot closer to the GTA than heading up the 400. And there's a lot of different variety. There's some great places on Lake Erie. There's some great places just north of Oshawa. So there's a lot of choice and variety, and I think that's a big trend that's going to continue moving forward. But getting back to the market, David, you're absolutely right. It's a big pet peeve of mine when people compare May of 2021 to May of 2020, because back in May of 2020, we were right in the middle of COVID. Things shut down. People were really afraid. They didn't really know what to expect. So, really hard to compare the two Mays. And when you do, you get some numbers that are completely inaccurate, in my opinion, judging, really what's happening with the market.
Yeah. And this year, May was quite a busy month for real estate. We in our firm, we had a very busy May and an extremely busy June that we're in the middle of right now. I don't think we've ever closed more transactions in a month than we will this month of June.
Amazing.
But I definitely feel a softening in our volumes a little bit for July and August. I think they'll still be very busy, no question about it, and we'll probably still be above last year's numbers. But we've talked about this in our podcast before, we lag behind you. The real estate agents are busy in April and May, and that translates into closings for us for June and July. So we're always lagging a little behind you because of the closing date. So
just because of the cycle of the transaction.
Yeah, so busy June for us means that you were busy in April and May and vice versa. So we always follow the trends that way, but definitely a bit of a slowdown, but slowing down only to become a really, really good active market. Like, at some point it's going to come off a peak. So we're just feeling that a little bit, but a lot of people out there interested, still buying properties and looking to change their surroundings. So we're happy with that. It's, we at our firm, it's not about purchase prices ever. We never look at that. We see that because we're seeing that, oh, you bought this property 3 years ago for $1 million and now you're selling it for $1.6 million. Like, wow, good for you.
Right.
But to us, it's still one transaction. So we're focused on it just being a transaction, but we see the market trends as well. You guys in your side of our industry are focused more on price. right?
We are, because I mean, we have a direct influence over the price, whereas your office receives the completed transaction and the price is set, right? So
Yeah.
two very different sides of the spectrums. And talking about the sales cycle, yesterday I had a really in-depth conversation with a planner, like from like a professional planner, and
Yeah.
we got into conversating about building permits and about subdivisions and about who's buying land and commercial development, and it was a completely different conversation, but very interesting from that transaction cycle, right? And it made me realize that he is even on a completely different side of the spectrum than we are as a brokerage, and where you are as the law office, and you're completing these transactions. So it was actually really interesting. We had a great conversation, and that would be a perfect guest to bring in one day on the podcast, just to share his viewpoints as to what's happening with building permits, who's buying land, who's applying for rezoning, what that whole process looks like. But it was a great conversation. We probably talked for about an hour, so it was great to hear his point of view, and who are the institutional buyers, who's not buying, who is buying, where are they buying, what the trends are from that perspective. Because I mean, he's 2 years ahead of even where we are at the brokerage, right? So
Right.
it was a great conversation.
Yeah, really interesting. We should definitely get him on. That'll make an interesting conversation. Like, like he's like looking into the future compared to where we are, and you are, and I'm even lagged behind you. So it's interesting, we're all in the real estate business, but at different stages of it.
Yeah,
And
I found it fascinating. Like, I had
yeah,
one of the most amazing conversations I had in a really long time, because I get excited about real estate. I get
yeah,
excited about really knowing what's going on and staying ahead of all the trends and trying to be a leader in the industry. So when I get a chance to look into the future, as I thought I did with that conversation, it was quite interesting.
yeah, definitely got to get him on. And just like you're mentioning from a business point of view, for you to examine your brokerage, for me to examine our firm's needs over the next year or two. It's really hard to crystal ball these things. So
Yeah.
getting some insight from somebody that sees the real estate industry at the early stages, that's a year or two ahead of us. It's a look into the future. So I'd be excited to have him on as well. Now, I know we've got some things on our agenda today. I did want to tell a bit of a story while we're talking about bidding wars and things that can happen out of bidding that we didn't have time to get into last week. So I just want to just relay this fact scenario that happened. So this was a classic multi-offer bidding situation. There was multi-party. I don't remember the exact number, but it was 8 or 10 offers, something like that, coming in. And this one real estate agent was, had put an offer in, and they were told first round they were, still in it. The top 3 or 4, others were dropping out, and they're sitting in the car with the actual buyer, and the listing agent calls them and says on speakerphone, so the buyer actually hears the conversation as well, and says, like, you're really close, like you're second, but if you can come up by like $100,000, you can get the property. So the buyer's on the phone too, and the buyer sort of says, I'm prepared to do that as long as you can prove to me that that's real, that there's another offer that's actually, like close to the 100,000 that I have to beat. Like, would you show me that offer? If we come in and bring in that bid, that signed agreement, after signing, will you show me that other offer? And the listing agent says, yes, I'll show that to you.
Right.
So they get off the phone with them, and the agent that's sitting in the car says to his client, like, the listing agent really isn't allowed to do that. I'm not sure if they're going to do that, and don't base your decision based on the fact that offer might exist or might not exist, because I'm not sure if he's going to really show it to you. He said he was going to show it. I don't know if he's going to show it, and he really shouldn't be showing it. He's not allowed to show it. It's a violation of RICO laws and etc. So base your decision. If you think the property is worth that $100,000 and you want to go in with an offer, fine. Okay, if you don't think it's worth it, it doesn't matter whether they show it or not, but base your decision on that. So the buyer decides to go ahead with it. They increase their offer, they go and submit it, they sign it's a firm deal. And now the buyer asks the listing agent, can I see that other offer? And the listing agent doesn't want to show it to them. So, sir, I said that, but I really can't show you, but trust me, it was there and I can't show it to you and everything. So yeah, before I tell you how the story finishes, you want to comment on that? I can see you're like, oh my God.
Well, first of all, Dave, I mean, certain rules exist to make sure that the process is fair and equitable for all parties, right? And the biggest thing is whatever is disclosed to one buyer has to be disclosed to every single buyer, so that every single buyer has exactly the same chance at obtaining the property, right? But the biggest rule here is that you can't disclose what the other parties are offering or what the motivation of your client is at the same time. It has to be a fair and transparent process to all, right? So, I mean, this listing agent, I mean, even though he might think he's acting in the best interest of his seller by saying to this other person what the seller is willing to accept, but by doing that, he broke at least, half a dozen rules that RECO, our governing body, the Real Estate Council of Ontario, has that govern these situations, right? And I'm sure that the buyer, after wanting to see what this other offer is, and the listing agent saying, well, you know what, I really shouldn't have said that and can't really show you the offer, was also feeling a certain type of way about the whole situation as well. So I could just see this whole situation escalating quite drastically.
Yeah. So what can the listing agent in that situation actually say to the competing bidders? Like, can he come back and say you're in second place? Is that your best offer? Is that fair game?
All he can do is give him an opportunity to improve without disclosing anything about the other offers or the current offer that's in front of him. So, at the end of the day, everybody has to be given the same, not information, but the same opportunity, right? Without disclosing any information with the other offers.
Yeah.
So the place where you are in the bidding process cannot be disclosed. You cannot tell the person you're second. You cannot tell the person you're close. What you can do is, if there's 10 offers and 3 are really close and ahead of the other 10, the seller could say, okay, you know what, thank you very much to the other 7 people that have brought in the offers, and choose to work with the 3 highest offers and say, hey guys, you guys are ahead of everybody else. I've chosen to work with these 3. However, please go ahead, improve your offer. And the next round around, whoever's the highest, we're gonna go ahead and really work with that one offer, right? So that's the correct way of handling a multiple offer situation. And when you really think about it and you break it down and you break down the psychology, that's really acting in the best interest of your seller, right? Giving a number to a buyer that they have to meet, even though it might seem like a good option at the time, you might get 2 people who go over that number, right? If you fail to give that number in the first place. So are you really acting in the best interest of your seller, even though you're attaining that number that the seller wants, right? Because if you hadn't disclosed to those 3 offers that, hey, the seller's willing to accept this, then maybe they, in their head, would have said, okay, you know what, $200,000 is where we really need to go to really feel comfortable that we're beating everybody else. Right. And that's why those rules exist, is because if you let the market work itself, if you let the mechanism of buyers and sellers really go through that fine-tuning process themselves, not knowing where the other offers are, that's when you're going to get the full effect of the market for the seller. As soon as you put a price out there, right, that's the ceiling. Right? It creates a ceiling, and that ceiling might not be in the best interest of the seller.
It could have exceeded that.
Exactly correct.
So it's an interesting story because you're looking at it from different points of view. It's obvious the listing agent did some things that he shouldn't have done. First of all, violating RICO regulations, number one, but also, like you're pointing out, not necessarily acting in the best interest of the seller, right? Now, in this case, the other side of it is I love to look at it from what the buyer's agent did. And I like what the buyer's agent did because the advice that they gave, like, pointing out the listing agent isn't right is likely to not come through with their undertaking to show that other offer and prove it because they really can't. And making it clear to the client, look, if you're bidding on this, bid on it because you think the value's there, you're comfortable with it, and you'll be okay paying that price. Don't do it because you're relying on what the listing agent is telling you, because it's obviously like, he's not acting properly. Right. So I think that was the right guidance by the buyer's agent. Right. So that was good.
And I mean, listen, if you're the buyer's agent in these situations, you're going to do whatever it takes to put the ball back into your buyer's court, obviously without breaking the rules. But if you ask the question and it gets answered, then the onus is on the listing agent to make sure that he follows the correct rules. But I mean, as a buyer's agent, I'm going to ask every question I can to get as much information to put my client ahead of the game, right? So really, it's on the listing agent to make sure that the process is handled fairly, ethically, correctly, and that no rules are broken, right? That all the rules are adhered. And sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes the clients don't understand the rules, the sellers don't understand the rules, and give instructions to the listing agents that are contrary to what can and cannot be done. So it's really important to make sure you lean on the brokerage, make sure you give myself or Sabia, the broker of record, a call, and just understand what you can and cannot disclose in these situations to make sure that you're fully protected and you do the right things and you handle the situation correctly.
Yeah, and we should make it clear in this story, it wasn't your agent, this was not your brokerage. It was some other brokerage, another listing agent, not your buyer's agent either in this scenario. My firm wasn't involved actually in this. I got consulted on this, but we weren't actually involved in the transaction. But I can tell you where it is because it hasn't fully been resolved yet. It's in court. But what happened was the buyer did not want to go ahead and close the deal because the buyer was ultimately not making their decision based on what the property was worth, but was relying on the fact that the agent was telling them a bunch of bullshit and wasn't comfortable and think they overpaid by $100,000. So decided not to close the transaction. So right now there is litigation involved, but it's the buyer that's being sued by the seller.
I see.
Okay. The buyers hasn't been able to get their deposit money back. Buyer doesn't have the house, the buyer doesn't have the deposit money, and the buyer is being sued because there was the property was ultimately resold at a lesser price, and they're going after them to keep the deposit. Seller wants to keep the deposit, seller wants to sue the buyer for damages, and there's quite a good likelihood that the seller is going to succeed in this scenario because the buyer had a signed contract. And even if the buyer did have reliance on what the listing agent said, that's not part of the agreement. There's nothing in writing. It wasn't a condition of the agreement. Okay. And the agreements are clear. You can't rely on verbal representations and things like that. Could the buyer, if the buyer loses this lawsuit, could they make a claim against the listing agent for fraud or for breaching RICO regulations? Maybe they can cover some damages, but that's what a judge might ultimately decide here. No, buyer, you still signed a contract. You had a duty to close. If you think you were wronged by the seller, by the seller's agent, you could always, close your transaction, sue them for damages if you think you overpaid because of their misrepresentation, but you still have a duty to close. And buyer chose not to, so the seller's suing the buyer, and the buyer's on the defensive. The buyer doesn't have the deposit, buyer doesn't have the property.
Yeah. David, I mean, I love that you shared this story because I think there's so many, positive learning lessons from this. And let me just really make sure that this hits home for everybody listening. When the market starts dropping, right? you are under scrutiny as a real estate professional for everything you did in that transaction. You have to do everything by the book all the time, because you just never know when the market goes like this or when the market goes like this, right?
Right.
And when it does, those transactions are pending, meaning that there is a firm and binding agreement, but the transaction hasn't closed. There's going to be one side of the story that feels wronged in one way or another, and the actions of both real estate professionals are really going to come under scrutiny, right? And this is no exception. If the market was going the other way and the market was going up, trust me, the buyer would have zero issues with the listing agent telling him that, there's another offer and he needs to go up by 100,000. He'd be happy as a kite, But
Exactly.
because the market is trending downwards, he's using any technicality he can to renege on the transaction, not close, and essentially not overpay in the correct market for that property, right? So really important, if you're a real estate professional, doesn't matter what environment you're in, make sure you follow all the rules, because they will save you and your clients from a lot of headaches, right?
Right.
And that's the most important thing I can really impress on everybody, is the rules are there to protect everybody, all parties in a transaction. So really important. You might think that you're acting in the best interest of the seller by making certain statements or making certain disclosures or making certain pushes, but you are not, because ultimately, look at the situation that the seller's involved now. The transaction hasn't closed. They had to resell the house at a lower price. They had to hire a litigation lawyer. They had to sue the buyer. I'm sure the listing agent feels bad. I'm sure the buyer agent feels bad. I'm sure the buyer feels a certain way. And it's all because, the rules were not followed.
Right. And as a professional in the industry, you got to be very careful to protect your own back too, in how you handle it. And even though it's clear in an agreement of purchase and sale that everything has to be in writing and you're not allowed to rely on verbal representations, et cetera, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts, it brings us back to that notion of acting in good faith or acting in bad faith. So there's, so what's the evidence of those things happening? And it's the verbal conversations, it's the text messages, it's the emails, it's things like that. So you've really got to be careful with all of that, because although they may not form part of the written contract, they still are valuable from an evidentiary point of view if these things do go to court, as to what the conversations were and where's the evidence that those were the conversations. Did you follow up with an email? Was there a text message exchange? So as a real estate agent, you got to keep these text messages around. They're very valuable later. Even in this situation with the buyer's agent in the car, from the buyer's agent, it appears to have said all the right things to the client, like don't rely on the listing agent to actually produce that other offer. They can't do that, right? But did that buyer's agent confirm that in writing to the buyer, or send a text to the buyer or an email to the buyer? Was it just a verbal conversation? Because it's really easy for a buyer to say, oh, I don't remember you ever saying anything like that to me. I didn't get proper advice from the buyer's agent. You shouldn't have let me go in with that offer. You didn't give me proper guidance and advice. And the buyer's agent said, no, I don't remember that conversation we had. And I said, that was wrong, and he's probably not going to produce that offer. And buyers somehow will conveniently forget that conversation may have taken place.
Yep.
So you got to be careful as an agent too, to make notes or to record things, confirm things in a text message, an email, and that stuff is all relevant. It doesn't necessarily form part of the agreement purchase and sale, but if things really go off the rails and it goes to court, all of those type of things become really relevant.
It should be a standard practice for all realtors to make notes in a file. Simple things, anything out of character, conversations that you have, even explaining an agreement of purchase and sale in plain language, if that was done and you actually sat down and did it with your client, make a note of it, make the time and date, right? And this is a habit that courts are going to look at. If you get into trouble and you get called in front of a judge and you can prove and document, in the last 10 files that you did that, this is a standard practice that you do with all your clients, that's going to go in your favor in a situation. So the more documentation you can have per file, the better. It's something that we really encourage all our realtors at Sutton Summit to do. It's a good practice. We actually created buyer and seller packages for our agents that include easy to read plain language APSs and buyer agency agreements. And I encourage all my agents to actually review an APS with their clients ahead of time, so that when the time comes to present an offer, the seller is aware, is familiar, understands the language, and knows what that process looks like ahead of time, right? A lot of the times when you find the perfect house and you're in a multiple offer situation, or you're excited and you're going through the emotional process of buying the property, a lot harder to really pay attention and understand the fine print when you're going through through that emotional process. It's a lot easier to do it up ahead of time and really learn and understand before you get out there to the market and start looking at properties. So it's something we really encourage all our realtors to go through their clients up ahead of time and go through that plain language APS, that plain language buyer representation agreement, just so you get that over and done with and get that out of the way before you go out and look at houses.
Yeah, and that's great advice and the right advice in my humble opinion too. Like they have to understand, like you and I are in the business, we're seeing agreements all the time, we're dealing with it all the time. Right. And I always remind my staff about that, but when you're a buyer or a seller, like it's only so many transactions in a lifetime that they're dealing with. Yeah. And there can be so much time between these transactions that the process is completely different.
Yeah.
Like it's amazing how the process, we think they're all the same, but you look at how we did deals 5 years ago and how we're doing them today, it's different on so many levels. There's always an evolution in these processes. And now you've got people coming off, these bidding situations. So not only do they understand the agreement of purchase and sale and what they're signing and the listing agreement and having all that explained to them, but they have to understand the process of going through these bids. And that's one of the reasons why there's been this drop off in markets across Canada. It's just buyer fatigue, because people are just experiencing, the losing on these bidding wars. And, and a good agent, before they go to the first one, is going to be going through that process with them, saying, hey, look, it's going to be a multi-offer situation. And if you're looking at these type of properties, every one we're going to go to right now might be a multi-offer situation. You might lose 4 or 5 times before you succeed. So you got to be prepared to do that. Here's the process. We might put in the best offer, really analyze the price, push it right up to the limit, and we still might lose, right? Because someone might outbid us. That's just the market. So you have to go through that process of explaining the process itself to a buyer and manage their expectations, right?
100%. You're dealing with emotions. You're dealing with people's biggest investment. And, the more you can prepare and the more you can work with them beforehand and educate them, the better the outcome will be, right? And whenever I personally work with any buyer or seller, my goal has always been to educate them to the point where they're comfortable and confident in making their own decision, right? I never want to make the decision for them. I just want to make sure that I give them all the right information and tools so they can make the best decisions for them and feel comfortable and confident doing that, right? And I see it, the first time I go out with them, they're hesitating. There's a learning process, right? And the worst thing that can possibly happen is the first time you go out, you find that perfect property, right? Because it's really hard to explain to your clients and to push them and say, guys, we can go out 100 more times, right? But you're not going to find this property. But you're building rapport, you're building trust, you're educating them You just haven't done enough of that yet to make them understand that that is the right property. And you push too hard at the beginning, you lose that vehicle of trust, and it's hard to have that working relationship. So it is a process, right? And that's what I want to impress upon everybody listening to this podcast, that it is a process, and working with the right realtor, that process is going to work really well and work smoothly. But there is a huge education component to it for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know there's some agents, would prefer to not find the ideal property for the first one in a bidding situation. Better they go through a process on a property that they sort of like, but maybe don't love, sort of knowing that they might lose on it because they're not going to extend themselves on it. But at least they get the process, they go through a round of it under their belt and see what happens.
Yeah.
And then when they don't get that one, it's not that big deal. Now you see what happened. I've been telling you this is what's going to happen, but sometimes you have to see it for yourself and live through it. And now we're going to find a property that's even better for you, but now you understand what we're going to have to go through in order to get it. And it's hard to tell people that you're going to have to overpay for a property when it's, when it's their home, and especially a first-time buyer. How do you say, yeah, your property's worth $1 million, but you're gonna have to pay $1.1 million to buy it?
Yeah. And the function is always, if you like a property, price is going to be an issue. If you absolutely love a property, price is less important, right? And that's why it's so important for agents to stage properties and to do a lot of prep work before listing. Make sure the right colors, if there's that one, orange accent wall in the kitchen, paint it a neutral color, bring in the right accessories, stage the home, make sure there's a, high quality virtual tour, make sure pictures are, full HDR pictures, and they have the right angles and the right viewpoints, and make sure that, you pick a bright sunny day to do all the pictures, and put in that hard work and all that prep work, because the more people you can get emotionally attached to that property, the more it's going to be reflected on price. If people just like the property, then price is going to be a huge issue, right? And that's really the difference between the best agents and hiring just a mediocre agent out there. Is the best agents know that they need to play on people's emotions to really get them attached to the property, and then price is less of a factor. They want the property, they're so engaged, they're so emotional, we got to have it, right? But yeah, I like this house, it's okay. Well, then let's talk about price. Price is the only thing we're talking about then, right? So and that's not the situation you want to get into.
Yeah, and you're making a great point. There's a big difference between an agent and a better agent, and you see that all the time. And that's why you're training your agents. You're providing support for the agents. You're trying to raise the bar for all your agents. That's why we do, the webinars and training sessions that I'm involved in. We're doing one in an hour or so from now as well. For your brokerage, we're doing them all the time, because those are things important. You got to elevate everybody's game. And there's a whole other level too. And you sort of reminded me of that. I did a blog on it not too long ago. The advantages of having a real estate agent or trying to do a private sale. And someone selling privately can't do all that list that you just did off the top of your head in 2 seconds about the staging and the painting and all those advantages of getting the advice. So like in our office, like we do the odd private transaction for people and help them draw up an agreement of purchase and sell, but I really don't want to do it, and I discourage people from it. The only ones that we really try to do is if it's between related parties or something like that, and they still need an agreement of purchase and sale to show a lender that it's a real transaction. But other than that, like, I'm encouraging everybody, you got to get an agent. You're way better off with an agent than trying to save the commission. Never makes sense. So that could be a good topic for a podcast, the advantages of having an agent versus trying to sell privately.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I think that's going to be a great topic. All I have to say on that topic is that I've tried to sell my own properties in the past. And ultimately, I had to enlist one of my colleagues here at the brokerage to help me with that process, just because it's so difficult to remove yourself, as an objective party when it's your own property, right? And it's really hard to mediate and keep those emotions in check. So yeah, absolutely. Even private transactions, really important to enlist the help of um, a great real estate professional. And the other thing that I have to impress upon people is it's really important to give your property the proper exposure on the market as well, because you might think you're getting a good price, but the market might be much higher, right? And until you go through that process, you will never know if you undersold your property or not.
Right. Right. It's no different in my business. They say a lawyer that acts for himself has a fool for a client.
Really? I didn't hear that before, but that's a good one.
Yeah, because the same thing, you have to step back. You don't see it when you're in the middle of your own transaction. You get emotional about your own properties or your own transaction, whatever it is. And you just, as much as you think you're professional about it, you just can't step back from that process, and something you just need another viewpoint on it. And it's really important, and we've done that even internally, like in our business, when we needed a partnership agreement, in our firm, between three partners, with when Jerry was a partner and Jonathan came in, and then me, we had three partners. We did a partnership agreement. So all three of us are capable of drafting a partnership agreement. We do it for other people all the time, but we decided it's really in our collective interest to bring in another lawyer to do the drafting and get our comments and do it through him, because we all come from a slightly different viewpoint.
Wow, interesting.
And so you draft based on that viewpoint too, and you don't always see it from someone else's point of view. And we said, we're better served by paying someone else to do what we all can do professionally for other people.
Right? You guys have done my partnership agreement.
Right. So I could do that, but it didn't make sense for us to take carriage of and draft on our own, because we're not all coming from the same point of view. Sometimes maybe he'll see something that we don't. And there were points along the way where it was, I think it was really good. I think it pushed the process. We got it done way faster. And I think it was more professional doing it that way, and having somebody independent look at it. So it's same thing in real estate. It's, it's hard to be be the agent on your own property. As much as and you understand the market and everything. Somebody else, you're still emotionally attached. Somebody else can come along and say, yeah, I get what you're saying, but this is how I see it. This is how a third party would see it. So it's always good to have that perspective.
I can't wait to peel back the layers on that one, because that's a great topic. And I think we can go really in depth and talk about a lot of different aspects there. And I think it's going to be really important for the public to hear that point of view, and to hear some of the even some of the legalities that exist when you're representing yourself, and some of the trouble you can get into as well from a legal point of view. So I think that's a great topic, David. I can't wait to peel back the layers and get more into it.
Yeah. Well, we always come up with new topics as we're going along. I don't even think we've gotten into what our intended agenda was for today yet.
No, we haven't. But we're 45 minutes in. We might as well jump into it.
All right. So where do you want to start?
Well, David, I mean, again, we keep talking about the market sort of trending off the high, and as it does that, we're seeing more and more buyers asking for extensions and needing a little bit more time to close. So we had a situation a couple of days ago where actually one of my realtors sold his own personal property, and the buyer agent called him to tell him that the buyer needs a 1-month extension. And he came into my office. He said, David, listen, I really don't want to grant this extension. What are my options?
And you said what? Or you want me to tell you what your options should have been?
Well, I went over all the options with him. I told him that, it's definitely in his best interest to take a further deposit, to get a further commitment from the buyer, just to make sure that, if he does give him a month extension, that when that new closing date will come, that he will be able to perform and close, and that, parties are not wasting their time. But I also told him, it's really important to ask some tough questions, right? Really get a good understanding of really what's happening financially with the buyer. Where are the funds coming from? Was there any change in employment? We're just going through a tax season right now, right? So, things, tough questions like, hey, have taxes been filed? Are there arrears owing, right, by the buyer? These are good questions to ask. You might not get all the answers when you ask these questions, but the more information that you can come up with, the more empowered you're going to be to make the right decision, right? But asking for a further deposit, of course, the buyer would be liable to pay per diem for any expenses on the property that they bought. So things like mortgage interest, right? Things like property taxes, utility costs to carry that property, reasonable accommodation expenses. In this case, he leased another property. So, paying for accommodations as well is not unheard of. But going through this whole process and really understanding, if the buyer is going to have the ability to close in the next 30 days is really important to the whole question whether to grant the extension or not.
Right. So I think your approach is 100% the right way to do it. When I get involved on extensions, the first thing that what I'm always trying to figure out, first of all, is it bona fide? And what are the reasons for it? And are we just going to take their word for it, or are we going to ask for some evidence to show, to establish that it's bona fide, is that they need the extension, number one. And then the other issue is how much of an extension is really needed. Okay. Because sometimes it makes sense to extend for a shorter period of time because you want to still put the pressure on them. Like in your scenario, like, I'm assuming it wasn't closing because they didn't have their financing together, right? So we get that all the time. We don't have our financing. We thought we had pre-approval. We didn't get it. We got to go find another lender. It might be that situation, or it just might be a delay. The lender just needs more time, needs another week or 10 days to process things and get things out. So we want to find exactly what it is. Like, what's the reason for the delay and how much time do they really need? But before I want a client to accept that, I want some evidence of it. Like, is there a real mortgage commitment? Where are you with the mortgage? If there's a mortgage commitment, send me a copy of the mortgage commitment. If it's supposed to close, today, but you can show me a mortgage commitment that says it's going to close a week from now or 10 days from now, then that helps us in deciding to give you an extension, because we can see that there is an end game, that it's real, as opposed to, well, sorry, we don't have a mortgage commitment. That's why we need a month, because we got to go shop around, because we got to look for private funds. We got to go to secondary market. Well, now, like, we have no idea if our deal is going to close in a month, right? So that's a whole different scenario. So you want to really dig down and find out what the underlying factors are. And that's where a real estate agent is incredibly valuable to me as a lawyer, because a lot of times it's the agent that can do some of that digging and can find out some of those things. Is the buyer selling another property? Is that the problem? Is the buyer's money tied up in another country and they can't get it out? You never know exactly what the factors are, but we want to know that we want to be established there's an ability to close. And just because they're asking for a month, I might tell a client, well, we don't want to give them a month. Like, that's too long. Let's extend for a week or 10 days and see where they are. So, and we can impose certain conditions on and make sure the costs are all covered, like you said. And then we maybe gave them 10 days. And now at the end of that 10 days, if they don't have a commitment at that point in time, we can pull the plug. Or maybe they've got a real commitment at that point in time that establishes a closing date that still might be another 10 days after that. So at the end of the day, maybe we end up giving them 20 days, but we're going to do it in a couple different extensions because we don't want to give them a whole month and we've lost that time, because at the end of the month, if they've got nothing, then we've got nothing. So
And
there's a bunch of factors that
along the way, right?
Yeah. So we really got to dig down and try and figure out what the reasons are. And at the same time, we want to establish how serious they are. And that's when we're looking like, can they give us a further deposit? How much of a deposit they give us up front? Can they give us a further deposit? Are they prepared to make that a non-refundable deposit? Are they prepared to allow us to give that money to the seller right now? Okay. As opposed to waiting to see if they default a month from now, because that helps establish how real they are and how confident they are that they're going to have an ability to close. Right. So we got to poke around at these things and see what their ability is. And, I've done some where we've extended for 3 and 4 months even to keep a deal alive, but we got additional deposits paid to us. We got significant deposits that we could release to the seller. And we established that, no, this buyer really wants it. And what he's telling us is true on some level, because he had money tied up in another country and couldn't get it all out. And I was still trying to sell properties here. Market, fell apart on him. So he got stuck, but he really wanted this deal and was prepared to put in hundreds of thousands of dollars over his original deposit of a couple $100,000 to keep the deal alive. Right.
In that case, I mean, again, it's the whole notion of good faith, right? The buyer is acting in good faith. He's taking certain actions that demonstrate good faith, that he's still in it. He's willing to put more money into the table.
Yep.
Nothing worse than, a buyer saying, well, give me another month, but you know what, I'm not putting any more money in here and I don't want to pay your carrying costs. And, that doesn't demonstrate good faith and,
right.
and leaves a lot of questions on the table.
Right. Yeah. And I'm always trying to encourage people to grant an extension if possible. Okay. Because that's usually better than pulling the plug, and you've already got someone there, and if they can establish that it's a shorter time frame they need it and it's real, then it's always a good decision, I think, for a seller to grant an extension. Make sure the seller's costs get covered and we negotiate all those terms and everything. But that's generally a better decision than pulling the plug, saying, we're keeping your deposit, we're going to sue you for damages, we're going to put on the market, they get into having to mitigate things like that. So, but just to grant them a month, I'm really leery about ever doing that. I'd rather grant them a shorter time because it also keeps the pressure on them. If you tell people, oh, you got another month, sometimes they'll do nothing for 3 weeks. And then the last week they're trying to get their act together and they say, oh, sorry, we're so close, but we need another week.
Right.
So I'd rather put the pressure. No, we're only going to give you a week, or we're going to give you 10 days. Let's see where you are at the end of the 10 days, because we have the right to pull the plug on you then, or we have the right to negotiate a further extension, and maybe we'll extend for another week or maybe another 10 days at that point in time, but we can keep looking at it. So I'd rather do the shorter extension, because you want to drill down and see how real they are. What progress did you make in the last week? If you give them too much time, nothing gets done.
Yeah, totally agree. And if it goes to litigation, the seller can also demonstrate that they've acted in good faith every step of the way. They gave them a further extension.
Yeah, we're trying to cooperate.
They're trying to cooperate. They're trying to work with the buyer. They're trying to take certain actions and create certain checkpoints along the way to make sure that the transaction is moving. But every single point, the buyer says no, 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 no. Well, now the seller has a much stronger case as well.
Right. And you're always analyzing, with the advice of the real estate agent, what the market conditions are. Like, it's really valuable for me to know as a lawyer when I'm trying to negotiate these extensions. If the agents tell me, oh, the market just dropped, and we had that scenario in one property. We were selling a property I think it was a $5.5 million sale. And they're asking for extensions. And the market really draws it to the agent. Like, if we do pull the plug, we got a $250,000 deposit. We can keep that, okay, and go back to the market. But what are we going to sell for? And the agent says, 4.8 to 5. Okay. So really, we know we're not going to recover everything. So we sell, let's say we sell for 4.8 and they keep the $250,000 deposit. So they got, just over 5 million, but they had a transaction, can they recover the other 500,000 from the buyer? So you got to analyze that point of view too. You'd be looking at it completely different if the agent said, yeah, we sold it for 5.5 million, but the market's going up. And if we go back in the market right now, we might get 5.6 or 5.7. So
Right.
your thinking changes a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
The position changes as well. And
Position changes completely.
Changes as well.
Yeah. Your position changes completely. So, and then we talked about that one last week where we had a lawyer telling your client, like, they need an extension for a day or two with a mortgage commitment. The lenders needed a couple of days, and the seller's lawyer said, nope, don't give them an extension because the agent says you can sell the property for $100,000 more. So don't grant them an extension. Like, that's just the wrong position to take in those circumstances, right? So, that's where lawyers and real estate agents have to work together to understand it, because you guys have information that I'm not privy to, and market conditions change really fast, and it changes on a particular property really fast. It's not always the global trends that we're talking about. It's just, a house in this market, like, nobody, there isn't, there's no action there. No one's looking. It's a tough sale, I want to know that from the agent. Is it going to be, if we put it back in the market, is it going to be sitting there potentially for months?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Great example of that is also condo markets, because each building is kind of like a micro market in and of itself, right? So if there's a condo listing in a building and you're the only comparable and for sale, well, the market's going to do something else. But if there's 14 other units, 8 of which are identical to you, right, then you're really only competing on price, and that changes things on the micro level significantly as well. So absolutely right, David. And what the market is doing really dictates, what approach your office takes. And that's why we like working with you as closely as we do. And our relationship is really important.
Well, I always appreciate that compliment. It's a two-way street. It goes both ways. But working with an agent and being comfortable with an agent, from a lawyer's point of view, is really important too, because we've had situations, with these extension requests when things start to go off the rail. And sometimes it's because, well, let's say it's not financing. Let's say it's seller hasn't been able to sell their property yet. Okay. So I would like the agent on our side to go in, sorry, not the seller, the buyer hasn't sold their property yet. So it would be good for our agent to go look at what they're selling, what they're trying to sell, and give me some information. Are they doing a good job marketing that property?
What's the competition like in for that type of house in that neighborhood?
Right.
It's invaluable data that all the parties need in order to really assess what's happening and how you can move forward, right? Because if the house is listed on the market but it's not staged and it's $50,000 overpriced, then maybe one of the conditions of granting an extension is that they do a price reduction and they hire a staging company.
Exactly.
And that's something that a lot of people don't understand, but you can ask for and stipulate those things as a condition of granting an extension, and it's a wonderful way of solving the issue, which is that they're overpriced, right?
Right. So it's not enough for us to be told, oh, we can't close because we haven't sold our property yet. Like, that's not enough information. We got to dig down and look, why haven't they sold that property? Maybe our agent can help them sell that property. Maybe they know someone that would buy that property. Maybe somebody in their brokerage, they can give it some exposure in your own brokerage to say, hey, take a look at this property. Tell you, here's a property that came across. The seller's motivated to sell. Get your clients out there, right? You can be helping on that side, or looking at how their listing actually is. Are they doing a really lousy job trying to market this property and get top dollar when it's not worth it? And if we know that, and they're not going to change it, that will make us, less, more reluctant to not grant an extension, because we think that, they're not likely to sell this property if they keep marketing the way they are. So an agent's job is never finished just because you got an agreement of purchase and sales signed. Sometimes you're called into duty to right till your transaction closes. You never know where you're going to be needed to help, analyze and get involved in a situation. So, that's important for agents to know.
Yeah, and two heads are better than one. And we always foster a team environment when solving solutions. And I think that's the biggest thing is, if there is a difficult situation, then come together and let's solve the issue together, right? And figuring out these extensions, figuring out what's really happening here, understanding the full story, clear communication, asking the right questions, and then working together to find a meaningful solution that works for everybody is the right approach.
Yep. And getting another set of eyes on it. Sometimes, we get so involved in transactions that we're in the middle of. And just like we talk about, if it was our own transaction, sometimes you need a third party to look at it and say, because you get emotionally involved at some point. So it's always good to get somebody else's viewpoint. And that's why it's important for agents to have someone like you to go to have a broker, to go to experienced broker to consult with you or Sabia or something and get another viewpoint and some guidance on it. And for you to sit down and take a look at it and say, well, you may have missed this, or you thought about that, or I just saw something else come across that might be a comparable that you really should look at and convince your client. But so it's always good to have that team approach and let other people get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's no different in your office than it is in my office, right? I mean, I know if a complex legal issue comes up, then you have multiple lawyers, multiple associates look at it. Everybody has a different level of experience. Everybody can draw on that experience as well, and sometimes different viewpoints really help and make a big difference.
Right. And that's why in our firm, like, we have weekly lawyer meetings, and we don't have an agenda established in advance. If sometimes anybody that has a topic or something you want to raise, but part of it is like, did anybody have anything interesting that happened this week?
Right.
To discuss. And we got something yesterday, so I was dealing with one of our lawyers on it. I said, okay, let's make sure we bring this up at our Thursday lawyers meeting, because it's a great discussion point. Sometimes we need to consult with each other right when we're in the middle of a deal and get another viewpoint. Anybody's dealt with something like this before, and it helps. But if not, sometimes it's just good to just kick it around at a weekly meeting and just get a different viewpoint. And it's not always, I'm the senior lawyer. It's not my expertise. It's not always Jonathan's expertise. It's, we learn from our associate lawyers as well. But, they're in the trenches. They see things. They're looking at stuff, and we learn that we don't always have the right answers, but we know how to try and figure out the right answers. And sometimes the collective wisdom is better than the individual wisdom.
Yeah, and even your clerks. I mean, I remember when we were closing on the commercial transaction, and dealing with one of your clerks, and she came up with a great solution for us as well. So I mean, it's definitely the whole team environment, and
right.
Everybody's part of that team environment as well, which is great.
Right, and that's we've talked about in recent weeks, and we talk about leadership and mentoring and stuff like that. And it's the type of atmosphere that we're fostering in our law firm. It's the type of atmosphere you're fostering in your brokerage, where we need that team approach. I think everybody's better served when you're open to ideas and comments and suggestions, and from every level of the people working in your brokerage and in my firm. Everybody sees things from a bit of a different viewpoint. And you need everybody's input, and I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Well, David, I think we've gone over an hour. We always get so emotional and so passionate about the topic of real estate. It's always great to have these conversations, but that I think we're going to wrap it up there. And I know next week we're going to be talking about rental items. So that's a really interesting topic as well. And it's an important topic to discuss for a lot of reasons. So I'm definitely looking forward to that.
All right. It'll be a good discussion as always, and there'll be some carryover from this week's that we didn't get to. I'm sure we'll talk a little about mitigation and things like that too. But anyways, no shortage of topics. Look forward to next week, David. Always great to see you and be with you.
Likewise. Stay safe, everybody. Enjoy the beautiful weather outdoors, and join us next week for a great topic as always.
Okay, take care.
Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market and dive deep to understand the issues affecting buyers, sellers, investors, and businesses. If you love real estate as much as we do, sit back, relax, and gain an insider's edge to the exciting world of real estate. David Gorski is a broker and the owner of Sutton Summit Realty, a powerhouse brokerage providing guidance to over 180 realtors. And David Korman is a partner at Kormans LLP, a respected law firm specializing in residential and commercial real estate transactions, with offices located in Toronto, Mississauga, and Markham.